Welcome back, everyone. And I would like to invite to the stage now, with great pleasure, Lisa Le Feuvre. Lisa, please join me. So here's the mic. Oh, you have one? I have one. Ah, fantastic. Very good. Okay, Lisa, of course, we're really proud to have you here. You are a curator, a writer, an editor who in 2018 became the inaugural executive director of the Holt Smithson Foundation in New Mexico, which is, and I'm sure you all know, but I will tell it anyway, the foundation dedicated to the legacies of Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson. And we had a brief telephone call last week. You were already traveling. And you told me that you never talk about land art.
It's true. For me, this term land art is a really difficult term. And I love difficulty. So for me, difficulty is never anything negative. Problems are always something positive because we have to think through it. I think for me, the reason why I always avoid the term land art, especially in a context like today, is that land art is a terminology that comes from art history rather than from artists. And many of us here are art historians. And what art history does is it categorizes the production, reception, and distribution of art. And the moment we categorize anything with language, we have problems. I love talking, and I love language, but it always fails me. And so often when I really want to say something, I use the wrong words. And it's in the gaps between the words. There's a great thing that John Cage said. He said, pay attention to the spaces between the words because the world will become more vibrant and energetic. So I think it's because of this categorization. So the reason why I don't like to use it is because it's in our language. And by skirting around, by using other words, I think we can do something really useful.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes. Yeah, we could also choose to be silent, but that's maybe not the way, right? So you circle around it, you hold it in your gaze, and you enter the whole problem space of landscape art from different perspectives, right? So, and I guess you're from America, that especially in American colonial context, the context of American colonial history. This is a very problematic space. And now you heard these representatives from the Dutch municipality and province say this morning, this is man-made land, right? So today, exactly 85 years ago, the dike between Lemmer and Urk was closed. It was on 3 October 1939. So how do you look at this problem space from that perspective of colonial history in America, and then the man-made land in Flevoland?
I'm going to answer it in your question in two ways, and it's such an important element to think of. The first way, I'm going to answer it in a way that I never normally do, but somehow I feel I'm among friends, so I can do. So I'll answer it personally. I'm not from America, but I've been living there since 2018. So I come as a stranger. Where I am from is complicated, and I think that's really important. So where I'm from, if I talk about it from land, is from a tiny island. And islands, I think, are really important with land art because islands are the places that feel the urgencies and the power disparities first, before the mainland. So the reason why I'm answering your question firstly in terms of a kind of personal element is I think it's really important that we consider the multiplicity of the land. We all have our personal stories, and our personal stories together connect into a broader picture. And so often where we are based is not where we are from. And that mobility, I think, is really important. I think in the context of the United States of America, somewhere that I am very much a foreigner in, I would say that my observances, and I've been in that place since 2018, is that in the United States of America, one has to recognize that every millimeter of that land is stolen land. And that's where you start from. But that's in a particular history of settler colonialism. What is land, after all? And I loved the question at the end of Humberto and Anja's discussion. Does the land have its own agency? Of course it does. We human beings are just one being in the relational, interconnected nature of land. And there's a great phrase that I read, I don't know, maybe 25 years ago by the Greek photographer John Stathatis, and it's always front of my mind. Yeah. He said that land is first shaped by geological history and then by human history. We cannot escape that.
I was wondering, while listening to you, then, because the man-made land here was won from the sea, of course. Mm-hmm. So we conquered nature and turned it sea into land. So how about art? Whatever we do here in the context of land art, landscape art, earthworks, should we look at it as a kind of repair?
No. Because I would say here in the Netherlands, in Flevoland, I would say that human beings haven't actually conquered the sea. I don't think it's really worked. I think that human beings might have tried to do that.
Yes.
But what human beings have done is they have insisted on a dialogue, on a relationship. So I would say that this thing called land art cannot repair anything. What it can do is it can raise questions. Raise questions to encourage us to think about our present through the possibilities of the future and the missed possibilities of the past. And for me, art is so important. I'm such a believer in it because art, I believe, cannot change the world, but art can change perceptions. And if we can change perceptions, we can rethink radically, we can get to the roots of how we attempt and so often fail to find our place on the surface of this planet.
Yes, beautiful, Lisa. Thank you. Yes. So I'm really curious what questions you will have as a referent for the talk that we will have up next by Britta Peters. So Lisa, thank you very much. You can take your seat. And then Britta, I would like to invite you to take the lectern. Britta has been artistic director of the Urbane Künste Ruhr. I have to Künste Ruhr. As a Dutch native speaker, I would like to say Künste Ruhr, but it's Künste Ruhr. And this is a, quote, polymorphous, decentralized institution for contemporary art in the Ruhr region in Germany. Please give her a warm welcome, Britta Peters.
So thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the invitation to Martien van Kampen and Anne Renders. I enjoyed very much hearing the speakers before me. I feel a bit alienated because the Ruhr is one of the regions with the highest density, so it's not so much about land art, and the name of my institution is Urbane Künste Ruhr, means urban arts Ruhr. But I hope I can tell you something where you can relate to as well, as I related very much to the keyword time, which Humberto Moro kind of ended up in his lecture, because my lecture is called Temporalities in Public Art, Reflections on an Ambivalent Relationship. I'm going to talk, have an introduction, And then I'm going to talk freely about a lot of examples, but first I have to stick to my notes. When we visited Flevoland for the first time, back then I came together with my colleague Marijke Lukovic, who's also here, on the invitation of Martien van Kampen. Martien told us about her concept for Land Art Live, which I think is fantastic. As the most of you probably know, in this context, the land art pieces of Flevoland get activated through temporary performances on the weekends. This brings together two different time modes: the permanent artwork and the temporary intervention, which is a good idea to challenge both. Having this in mind, I decided to focus on questions of temporalities in my keynote, also because that gives us the chance to analyze some public art projects from a new point of view. In my practice as a curator, who mainly does new commissions in public space, for permanent sculptures and installations as well as for temporary ones, I'm often confronted with questions of time. How long will the production take? When is the opening? How long will the exhibition be on display? And what are going to be the opening hours? How durable should the installation be built? Is there enough time to involve special groups and so on? These might seem practical questions, but they already tell us a lot about the relationship towards the public. For example, is there any room left for something unforeseen, for development? Or does public art get more and more institutionalized? In 2010, together with two colleagues, I was invited to set up a concept for an exhibition at Frankfurter Kunstverein and in the city of Frankfurt to accompany the researches of the cluster of excellence called Normative Orders at Wolfgang Goethe University. We decided to focus on the topic of demonstrations, according to its Latin origin from demonstrare, to show, to prove something, or to protest on the streets. Demonstrations Making Normative Orders was the title of the show, which included historical and contemporary artworks as well as performance in public space. As usual and necessary, we prepared the exhibition for more than a year. We did research, made contracts, loan requests, and applied for permits. Meanwhile, global politics developed much faster than we did. The so-called Arab Spring Revolution gained full power in 2011, followed by M15 movement in Spain, and at the end of the year, Occupy Wall Street led to a lot of discussions. Some aspects of this we could integrate in the exhibition, many others not. We were confronted with the fact of being overtaken by reality, which resulted in new perspectives on our show, and the question if protests should be exhibited while they are still happening. The latter sounded quite weird to me. The learning of the situation was to understand once more that art works on another time level than the daily news. But of course, this different time level is not outside the real world, and the opposite. The timely situation or framework strongly affects the reception of artworks and projects. That's one of the conditions I want to talk about. Latest with the experience of the pandemic, I got kind of obsessed with the question of time relations in public art with timings and temporalities. In February, March 2020, we were about to open a huge temporary show in public space with Urbane Künste Ruhr, and we had to postpone it for 1 year, but still couldn't fully open in 2021. That means, in the moment public art was needed most to keep some public life going, we had a ghost exhibition under sheets, and we were not allowed to show it because we had to avoid people gathering on the streets. Germany was very strict. To put all the energy, time, budget into the preparations of a project, which in the end couldn't fully take place, shows the whole anachronism of a biennial or triennial format in times of uncertainty as we experience them right now. At the same time, our permanent sculpture path, Emscher Kunstweg, had more visitors than before, which was very nice, even though I would argue that these visits were more private experiences with the single artworks than public encounters. The conflict laid in the expectation that temporary art in public space has to be contemporary, to be meaningful, and when times change too dramatically, it loses its determination. To work with more flexible and less predefined formats could be a valuable experiment. permanent artworks, instead, for sure not all of them, can be read differently in changing contexts, as I will show in a minute with examples. I started to do some research on the subject and realized that in opposite to questions of site specificity, there is very little literature, especially focusing on the aspect of time in public art or even in sculpture. Ulrike Ströbele, who organized the conference Sculpture in Time in the 20th and 21st Century in 2015 at the University of the Arts in Berlin, came to the same conclusion. The occasion was the great relevance that the topic of time has in connection with sculpture, without this having been intensively examined by art history up to date, she states in the very first sentence of the catalogue. The discourse of the 90s and the turn of the century argued for temporary process and community-based projects instead of permanent sculptures, but it did so from an activist and political point of view. On one hand, permanent sculptures seem to be more conservative and the representation of a top-down gesture. On the other hand, as for example, the Korean curator and professor for art history, Mi-won Kwon, pointed it out in her essay One Place After the Other from 2002, permanent sculpture don't risk the neoliberal fluidity to be easily removed when a site is needed for something else. In her famous text, she distinguished between art in public places, typically a modernist abstract sculpture placed outdoors to decorate or enrich urban spaces, and art as public space, on the other hand, which is less object-oriented and more site-consciousness art, but in opposite to the third category called art in the public interest or new genre public art, often temporary city-based programs focusing on social issues rather than the built environment that involve collaborations with marginalized and social groups. It's funny because we always come back to this time, like the 90s or the 2000s. Susan Lacey was also mentioned. I think this was the most vivid time of debate around the subject of public art. The three paradigms of public art she summarized, so I'm still with Mi-won Kwon, reflect border shifts in advanced art practice over the past 30 years. The slide of emphasis from aesthetic concerns to social issues, from the conception of an artwork primarily as an object to ephemeral processes or events, from permanent installations to temporary interventions, from the primacy of production as source of meaning to reception as site of interpretation, and from autonomy of authorship to its various expansions in participatory collaborations. Quote, while these shifts represent greater inclusivity and democratization of art for many artists, art administrators, art institutions, and some of their audience members, there is also the danger of a premature and uncritical embrace of progressive art as an equivalent of progressive politics. The shifts in artistic practice, while challenging the ideological establishment of art, may at the same time capitulate to the changing modes of capitalist expansion. End of quote. Summarizing, it can be said that the main focus of the discourse around public art lays on spatial and social questions, well knowing that in the end, time is a spatial dimension as well. Since time and space are both, on one hand, physical and measurable units, but on the other hand, complex and endless dimensions in a more philosophical sense, it's quite a challenge not to get lost in there. Clearly, public art is not public just because it's out of doors or in some identifiable civic space or because it is something that almost everyone can apprehend, writes the art critic Patricia C. Phillips, whom I just discovered as another interesting voice from the lively debates in the 90s. She wrote for Art Journal in the essay is called Temporality and Public Art. Quote, it is public because it is a manifestation of art activities and strategies that take the idea of public as the genesis and subject for analysis. It is public because of the kinds of questions it chooses to ask or address, and not because of its accessibility or volume of viewers. This is, of course, a far more difficult and obscure definition of public art, and the methods and intentions of production and criticism are less predictable, more unruly. It requires a commitment to experimentation, to the belief that public art and public life are not fixed. There are many variables. Time is perhaps the most critical and the least frequently addressed. So to start an open-ended examination and discussion, I brought some examples and decided to group them in three chapters. In the first chapter, simultaneities and non-simultaneities, I would like to introduce 4 examples from Skulpturprojekte Münster, in which the time of reception plays a significant role for the changing understanding of the artwork. Time is material. The second cluster deals with the question how a fixed period of time or simply the durability of a material can work as a material condition itself. The last chapter, working with the structures, shows some examples in which the timely structures are directly addressed or conceptually integrated from the very beginning. So, here we go. Klaas Oldenburg, the giant pool balls. As the archive of Skulpturprojekte found out, Cosi van Bruggen was very much involved also in this artwork, so this is why I mentioned her here as well. And it was part of Skulpturprojekte Münster in 1977. And in the beginning, like the first issues of Skulpturprojekte in 1977 and also 1987 were very much criticized by the population of Münster and really misunderstood in many ways. So in the beginning also, the giant pool balls raised a lot of anger. And they are till today always full with graffiti. But now you see in the corner, there are already little winter balls with the giant pool balls, and the bakeries start to bake rolls, like giant pool ball rolls. So the reception of this piece in the last 40 years changed dramatically, and now you cannot find any flyer of the city of Münster with having not the giant pool balls on the preface. This is why we decided to work with Samuel Nyholm, and he did this caricature for us when we were about to set up the Skulpturprojekte in 2017. And this is another work which is very much connected to the notion of time. Michael Escher, Installation Münster. He did in 1977 this installation with a caravan called Riba Family, which was quite typical during that time. And he parked it outside the center of the city. And it was always repacked on a Monday when the museum is closed regularly. And during that time, nobody gives so much attention to this piece because it was the same edition when there was Klaas Oldenburg, Donald Judd, the huge concrete object, and Michael Escher was a bit under the radar. And then he was asked to participate again in 1987, and he kind of thought quite a while, came up with the idea to do the same setup again, take the same kind of caravan and park it in the same slots. Same happened in 1997 and also in 2007. But we have to say, and this was also the title of a small exhibition we did for Skulpturprojekte 2017, that he always, hearing me? Yeah, he always double-checked if it's still a good idea, if it will still work. There is a really nice quote by Albero, Alexander Albero. He puts it in a longer text, and he says, each of the sculptures of the artist installed in the German city was significantly different because the context of production as much as the of reception had changed. As I said, 1977 was more subtle. 1987 was kind of, people said, it's boring. This artist doesn't have any new ideas. And 1997 was more like an old-timer. And also there was the collapse of Soviet Union, so people had more associations with work migration, for example. And in 2007, the documentation of the piece became the iconic motif of Skulpturprojekte in 2007. Here you see that there was no documentation, but also the exhibition time changed a bit. So sometimes there is no photo because the caravan was not parked over there because the exhibition was in another period. here is Catalog of Skulpturprojekte in 2007. And we were thinking, because Michael Escher died in 2012, so we were thinking, no, 2015, I think. We were thinking how to deal with it. 2012, sorry. And there was a minute where we thought maybe we can, it's such a conceptual work, maybe we should kind of pick up on this, or we should use any AR or something. But then we decided against all of these ideas. As I said, there was this exhibition with the title Double Check, and we invited a very interesting artist called Alexander Rischer, who in his photographic practice always has some ghost photographies. And so he made photos of the spots where the caravan was parked before without the caravan. Thomas Schitte is a funny example. He came up for Skulpturprojekte in 1987 with a Sherry column, a very postmodern artwork, like before, or postmodernism on its highest level. He reflected on what can we have a monument for. Maybe the grocer next door is the only one who really deserves a monument. So he came with a cherry column to celebrate like the daily life. And he chose the lac, which was very popular for cars at the same time, this red lac for the cherries. And he placed the sculpture on a parking slot. Then the city of Münster decided to buy the sculpture and to change the place into a nice place with coffees and everything. So the work changed because the city decided to change the surroundings. And we found out that he was always thinking about a melon column as well. And then in the context of Skulpturprojekte 2017, we were cooperating with Skulpturenmuseum Glaskasten Mahl, and we decided to realize the melon column for Mahl on a parking slot. So together with Thomas Schitte, of course. So this is like an appendix to this story. Then Lara Favoretto is a very interesting artist from Italy, and she has this series called Momentary Monument, and she somehow brings in a huge rock directly from the quarry in relation to an existing monument. In Münster, it was the train monument, which is very remembering a colonial past, and she brings in the empty stone. It's a bit like a money box, and this is how it works. You can put some money in there, and the money somehow brings the artwork and also the history directly into the present time, because the money is donated for, in this case, an organization helping refugees who get deported again in North Rhine-Westphalia. So on one hand, you have the colonial monument. On the other hand, with this money box, you have a direct connection to present time. And the empty stone in the end of the exhibition time got kind of demolished and was reused as building material for kindergarten. So it's super interesting, I think, in terms of how work monuments in public space, how to activate them, how to do relations with the present time. So next chapter is time as material. I brought examples from, you see the names. I'm going to rush a bit through it. Xavier Leroy and Scarlett Yu. He comes, or both come from the field of performance, and when he was invited, he said, how can I be in a sculpture show? How can I be there 24 hours, 7 days a week, like a permanent sculpture? So he decided to have little actions, which were told to a lot of people. There were workshops to share these little actions. There was also a small talk about time among these small performative pieces. So everybody who learned this in kind of workshops was allowed to do it wherever they stand, like in the bar, in the evening, or in the station. So you see some images over here. It's also an interesting way to reflect on presence and time. Nicole Eisenman, here is an image in the Foundry. She was kind of respectful for the idea to do some bronze. And before doing bronze, you always have to do a plaster. And so she decided to have this sketch for a fountain with 3 figures in plaster and 2 in bronze, which created like a huge tension because the plaster figures was very clear they are not going to survive the summer, and the bronze is going to be somehow forever in this world. And this is exactly what happened. Also, the plaster figures get vandalized in between. But then, in the end, since there was such a history about this aggression against this sketch for a fountain, in Münster, a group founded themselves, trying to collect money to make a permanent version of this fountain. And in 2021, this new fountain, which is now completely made out of bronze and aluminium, could be opened. This is in many aspects also an interesting story about the involvement of citizens. Like they saw an artwork, and to keep the artwork, they collected really a huge amount of money to rebuild it and to have it in the same spot. This is a work we did for Emscher Kunstweg with David Jawlonowski. I think he's living somewhere close by. I haven't seen him if he's in the audience, but it's super nice also for the context in the Ruhr region, which is the post-industrial heart of Germany. And he came in with this combination with a material made out of recycled plastic and million years old sandstone, and they're like puzzled together, so it's very stable. So this artwork, public hybrid, besides many other aspects, is also a reflection on the region, which is built on extraction and then using the already produced material, like the plastic, again, to have like a utopian vision somehow that we can rework with this material, which is already made out of resources. And on the other hand, you have this kind of very landscape. It looks a bit like something which could have been there or could come in the future as a landscape site. Then we have Jeremy Della speaking to the earth, and it will tell you 2007. In 2007, he proposed this project, quite easy setup. In Münster, you have a lot of Kleingardens, and he asked 50 associations to have a diary for the next 10 years. And 30 of these Kleingardens decided to participate. And how they participated was completely up to them. These diaries are not only diaries about what's happening in the Kleingarten, it's also a diary about who is filling out the book. Sometimes pages are teared apart because there was some fights maybe in the associations. Some are really reflecting on what's happening in the world. Some are only focusing on the plants. So it's a very interesting document about these last 10 years. And it was not clear that this will be part for Skulpturprojekte 2017, but when we saw this kind of high quality and interesting mix of the books, of course, we were very delighted to take it into the exhibition. Now I'm coming to chapter 3, working with the structures. And I brought one legendary example from Hamburg, Park Fiction. In the middle of the 90s, there was a program from Hamburg Kunstverein called Weitergehen, which is a wordplay, means on one hand we have to go on the other hand we have to go further. And in the context of Weitergehen, there was proposed this park for St. Pauli by Christoph Schäfer and Casey Skeen in the very beginning. And the cultural department said, yes, we want to realize the park, but it was always clear that the building department wants to realize some new housing with like lofts on top, because it's really the edge of the river in the harbor. And then there was a fight of competences. I think it was like a miracle situation. Maybe it's not so easy to repeat this one, but was like nothing happened. They were not building the new houses, but also the park wasn't realized. And then Park Fiction was invited for a documenter in 2002. And somehow they were still keeping on working on the project and fighting for it they invested a lot of time, in terms of time, to realize it. And then in 2005, it got realized, and it's still there, and the city really changed dramatically through this artwork, because otherwise this part of the harbor wouldn't be so accessible like it is now, and it's really important public space for people to be there. This is another example from Emscher Kunstweg. The whole project Emscher Kunstweg is very much connected also to questions of time, because it used to be a temporary show on a triennial basis. And when I came as artistic director for Urbane Künste Ruhr, I proposed that we take the leftovers from the temporary exhibitions and we turn it into a permanent sculpture path. And this is why I'm working together with Marijke Lukovic as a curator, and we, on one hand, took care of the existing artworks, like asking all the artists, is it still okay for you after 10 years? And on the other hand, we invited new projects, and this one is by Julius von Bismarck and Marta Diachenko. It's called Neustadt, and it's also very interesting in terms of time, because on many levels, among the many levels which are reflected in here, there's also this level of the structural gap in architectural planning, that once things are planned 15 or 20 years before they are realized, and when they are realized, they are already like out of time, and so on and so on. And they didn't only pick the brutalist, post-war modernist building, which could be an interesting focus in itself, but they took like a really wide range of buildings and questioned the audience, and it works very well. What do you think about this building? Do you think it's right that it was demolished? Maybe should be there still. What's there instead? And so on. And they brought these sculptures from Berlin with a boat, which is also interesting. So it was a performance before they got immobile in this side. They were mobile on the boat. This is a project by Urbane Künste Ruhr with Irina Hajduk, and it's said from 2018 ongoing. In fact, we opened it in 2022, but she dated it on 2018 because it's the same as Humberto said. We started to talk about something in 2018, and it's called Healing Complex, and the idea was to set up a public oven on one hand, but like a public bakery as a space to bake your own dough, but also to use the heat for a public sauna or a public relaxing event, which is quite complicated. We started with the oven, and then we had a lot of experiments to implement this former abandoned church as a new social space in Gelsenkirchen. Here you see, for example, we did also mushroom growing in there. But after 2 years, we fell out of the temporary permit. And to get into a permanent permission for this building, we would have to invest a lot of money, which was really not possible, also not somehow possible with the statutes of Urbane Künste Ruhr. So we had to stop it here, but we have the furniture, and we are now going to lend the furniture over to the old synagogue in Essen, and I think we are going to keep on working with the idea and also with the project. And now, just briefly, the newest thing we are doing with Urbane Künste Ruhr is called Grand Sneltour. Maybe it's a good somehow connection to the spiral jetty, because it's going to take us 3 years. It's really a long-term project, but in this project we are visiting all the 53 cities of the Ruhr. And when we are in there, it's more short time, more performative, more happening. But the whole project has this durance of 3 years, and we are going to have a chronic, which is then made by 53 other artists who are somehow with us in the same city, but not close to the trailer. But for the trailer, we have artworks which are especially somehow meant to be there. And we have a lot of performance, and we prepare every stay in the city months and in front. And we have the so-called local support, groups of people who help us to prepare this stay. And Lütje Güzel, for example, an artist from Duisburg, she's doing this local blackouts, like for every stay she uses the local newspaper, and then she creates a new poem by blacking out a lot of text, but keeping some words. So I'm coming to the end, yes. This is also part of the Grand Snell tour from Niels Norman, very nice tablescapes. And another proposal, urban mini golf. So I could finalize with another quote by Patricia C. Phillips, but I could also just stop here. One more quote. Yeah. Okay, because it's also a nice one and maybe helps us to get in the discussion. The historical precedents for public art offer no template for the present or for the future. Public art does not have to last forever. It does not have to cast its message to some unmistakable but platitudinous themes that absolutely everyone will get. It does not have to mark or make a common ground. As the texture and context of public life changes over the years, public art must reach for new articulations and new expectations. It must rely on its flexibility, its adaptability to be both responsive and timely, to be both specific and temporary. Thank you very much.
Yes, very nice, Britta. I think you've showed us the whole spectrum between the permanent and the ephemeral. And I'm sure, Lisa, that the two of you can have a conversation about this. So please take your places. I will keep the mic to get some questions from the audience again. Yeah.
Thank you, Mette, and thank you so much, Britta. And Mette, please come and stop us from talking, because there are many things we need to address. So my role is to start this conversation with a response. And there's two things that I want to first bring into the conversation. Life and sculpture. So this conference, I've had the great honor of talking with Anna and Martina about it. And Anna and Martina always talk about, you always have been using this phrase, land art lives. And because I'm generally quite annoying, I always insist on calling it land art lives. So for non-native English speakers, I hope that you understand that difference. So land art lives, it's almost like you need a placard to say land art lives. But land art lives is about this time. And one of the things that connects everyone here is we all have lives. So that's really my prelude to sculpture. The traditional idea of sculpture, I think, is so connected to monumentalism. And this idea that sculpture, if you think about an image of what sculpture is, for many people, for specialists, not non-specialists, it's a monument in the public realm that comes to mind. And monuments are built to be timeless, to be there until the end of time. And Britta, what I really loved about your presentation is that you're talking through the life of sculpture. And the life of sculpture being something that profoundly exists in the realm of the political. Mm-hmm. And I'm using that word very, very precisely. It comes from the philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy, who talks about the realm of political, which is where we all come together and we fight and we argue and we disagree. And politics is the administration of the realm of the political. Two different things, equally important, but with different emphases. So really what I want to kind of extract from the examples that you've given us is about the life of sculpture. And you've used this term, public art, public sculpture, performance. We're here to talk about land art. Could you reflect a little? And you are the person to do this, given that you led the last edition of Sculpture Projects Münster, on this thing called sculpture and its weight on land art.
Okay, yeah. There is one aspect I was not talking about, but this is also something which connects sculpture very much to time. If you talk about the classical bronze or like really casted the sculpture, it takes a lot of time to produce it. You know, it's really super, super heavy material and absorbing a lot of energy. I think sometimes this is also the feeling you get when you see this heavy sculptures, that there is a lot of work and a lot of material and time which went in there. And I think the notion of sculpture is really wide. This is what I was talking about with Xavier Leroy and Scarlett Yu. I thought it was super interesting how they kind of reacted on, we cannot be present 24/7, but we can spread out. We can use like mass intelligence or mass present to be there. And I like all these new experiments, like trying to widen the border all the time. Sometimes I tend to speak about installations more than sculpture, because I think if something has a body or is very physically more in the center of something, it feels like a sculpture. But if it's more immersive for me, it feels more like an installation or something. But for example, land art is also not in my vocabulary so much, even if there are some works you could also see through the land art lens. But the Ruhr has such a density, as I said, of population, and so the land was always there to serve everybody with coal and materials. So it's not so much in the focus as a landscape, like a romantic landscape. But as an anecdote, I really got a request from somebody from politics if I would have an idea how to do some land art on the fields where they now were extracting brown coal. And I thought it was so cynical, you know, just this huge conflict in Hambacher Forest, where they are all, like taking all the brown coal, and people have to move away and have to leave their houses. And then to this request, if we can think about having some land out over there, was kind of super brutal, I think.
And I think that really opens a really friction-filled question, which is ensuring that art in the public realm, public sculpture, land art, anything that comes over this umbrella, that its role is not there to be socially ameliorative. It's not there to fix a problem. It's there to enter into the discourse.
Yeah, and that's true. And this is something which kind of crossed my mind when I was listening also to the speakers before me. Maybe land art, if you use the term and if you go in this tradition, is a space where you can protect public art for being having to be everybody's darling or to fulfill all wishes or something. Because public art is often treated as, yeah, as you said, as some glue or kit for society, and everybody has ideas what should be changed, that not much more people can connect with it. And so if you kind of talk about land art, it's a bit of escapism of this pressure.
But perhaps, but that really brings in, I think, one of the major issues, myths, erroneous elements of land art. Land art is often talked about hand in hand with this phrase, remote. And this phrase, remote and land art, makes me really itchy and scratchy. Because I always want to think about remote from what? Mm-hmm. So if we talk about, for example, Nancy Holt's sun tunnels, so often the discourse will say, in a remote landscape. Remote from what? Its location is certainly not remote from the 125 or so people that live in the nearest settlement. When we think about art in the public realm in the city, art in one place can be remote from another. So I think this idea, that this myth of remoteness is almost trying to return to all of the myths of landscape painting and so on. And the work that you're doing right now, Britta, is in an urban situation, and you're talking about this in a conference about land art, which I love. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about urban remoteness and how you think through that sense of location, site, journeys when you're commissioning and thinking through sites in the current project that you're working on.
Yeah, you know, there are different projects, and Emscher Kunstweg, of course, we could have also had a lecture, especially on Emscher Kunstweg, because this project developed close to a river which was used as a sewage canal for really 200 years, but since 30 years they're working on the so-called Emscher Umbau, means trying to get the wastewater under the soil, which wasn't possible because of mining, so the soil was always moving. And this is a super interesting landscape, because on one hand the river had long time a concrete bed, so it's like it's like land art. You know, you have this. You always see the Emscher. You can always recognize in every part of the Ruhr. This is the Emscher, because it's really like cut through the landscape, and a lot of artworks over there. Some of them which we brought in, like the David Jablonowski, but also other ones. They, of course, work with the site, with nature, with questions of transformation, with questions of pollution, with questions of the relationship between culture and nature. And the Grand Snail is completely different, but for me, it's super interesting, because we are going to have 3 years where the region changes, because we are doing the snail trip. The climate changes. I'm afraid we are going to be confronted with a lot of changing climate in these 3 years, and we are also giving some report later. And politics will change, I'm afraid also. And we are in the smaller cities and then coming to the bigger cities. So it's like a long-term study about the region under a lot of aspects. And so this could also be somehow, now I don't want to declare everything for land art, but it has some, the duration, like the movement in space also has some, maybe some aspects of this.
And as well as land art, art in the public realm, public art, I'll keep on using all these terms to try and avoid all of them, as well as this sense of travel, of journeying. And I have to say, I loved it that there was a group of people who came in late because of the train. That's really absolutely foundational to this topic. There's also the mobility of the artworks too. So I wonder, just as a last point, because I can see Meta in the corner of my eye, if you could reflect a little bit on the ways in which documentation makes these iterations, these examples of artwork mobile through time and space. Because there's always a kind of a hand-in-hand relationship to maybe all artworks, but it's much more, it's in sharper focus when it comes to art outside of the museum. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on that.
On imagery, you mean?
Well, I'm saying it could be images, it could be rumor, it could be films.
Rumor is one of my favorite. Yeah, I think it was said this morning that really to experience a land art piece, you have to be there. This is also something I would share. But I think it's nice also this kind of bubble which sometimes exists around artworks, like only made out of rumor or something. There is this artist called Clara Hopzer, and she has the goal to dive through Europe. So she's always diving parts of the rivers, sometimes really dangerous. And the imagery of this is super. It's a bit boring because she's always underwater. But when she comes, when she comes up, she's telling the people the story. I'm going to dive through Europe. And then everybody's like, where are you starting? And then you go to the Black Sea and you go, rah, rah. So there is a lot of, this artist is working, the project is working a lot with the stories. For example, local press, which is also a phenomena in this rumor thing, they kind of jump on this, of course, and then people start to have a huge project in mind, this is fantastic.
Yes, thank you so much, Britta and Lisa, for this brief journey through a diverse range of topics with regard to land art. I would just like to make sure that we use the wisdom of the crowd once more, and granting you maybe 2 questions. Would that be okay? And rest assured that this afternoon we will change roles, and it will be up to you to share your thoughts with us. But for now, maybe based on the talk that Britta gave us. Yes, there you are. Maybe could you please pass on the mic again? There you are.
Hi, thank you so much for your interesting talk and conversation following. And also in relation to the previous speakers, one thing which I was just thinking about now is this idea of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Not only as the physical object, but also the organizational things, all that is kind of hidden, the structures which are used to generate the work and such. And I was wondering if you could just reflect on that, the 2 of you. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think I was talking about a bit in my first introductory words because, this is an infrastructure question. When can we start with the exhibition, or when will the project start itself? But also, how long can it be seen, and how do people get there? And this is maybe something which relates very much to here. The Ruhr, on one hand, we have this density of people living over there, but on the other hand, it's super spread out. It's like 5 million people living on 4,400 square kilometers in 53 cities. So in between is always like semi-urban space. And for the Ruhr-Ding, which was a temporary project I did for 6 years, every 2 years, we tried to organize, for example, bike containers. We prepared routes for people to go by bike, and also we focused on what's in between the project. It's not so much only to come from one project to the other one, but also to kind of open your eyes and to, you said it before, art is something which helps you really to concentrate on perception of the ordinary life, also to see the strange things and beautiful things in there. So we were trying to offer all these and to make people really use it. But the critique was endless, that it's too spread out. Some freaks somehow loved also to spend 2 days over there. Like I'm sure Flevoland has its fans who really love to go for 2 days, 3 days, and to get lost also in this journey. But in terms of an exhibition, which should also be somehow more dense, maybe because it has a thematic frame and the artworks are corresponding with each other, it was very hard really to navigate the exhibition itself.
I think infrastructure, I love infrastructure, because it's just like art. It's conceptual and it's material. Mm-hmm. So it's not, infrastructure is the travelling, the literal being on the train, let's say, the movement, but it's also the policies, the documents, the permits, and that's all part of the art, and you can see it explicitly in a lot of the wonderful examples that you showed, Britta. But infrastructure is highly political. It's where you can make conceptual differences, and we can't escape infrastructure. It's everything, even the infrastructure of time. Yeah. Meta's going to get us to stop soon. That's infrastructure.
Yeah. And one more thing, the Escher, for example, that he reparked the caravan only on Mondays when the museum was closed was also so interesting, like somehow pointing out this point of infrastructure.
Yeah, but really nice question. Thank you very much. Infrastructure. So one more, the last golden question. Yes, I'm running up to you. And this is my journey to you. Where are you? There? Okay. Please tell us your name.
Femke, hi.
Yeah.
I was wondering, maybe alluding a bit to your role as a curator, if an artwork is, let's say, an expression of a space where different politics, communities, ideas, wishes meet inside the kind of urban landscape or outside, how do you make sure as a curator that this site, which is also a site of a friction of all these things, stays a site of friction and not merely becomes a kind of articulation of local politics increasingly, or what politician wants or what local citizen want, but that it stays this kind of productive space of friction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Basically, of course, this is something for a Sculptuurproject, which is a learned procedure. It's clear every 10 years the exhibition takes place, and the exhibition has its own space, and sometimes it has to be negotiated with the city, but somehow it's a learned procedure. In the Ruhr, it was, since it's such a huge area, the focus of, for example, the politicians was not so huge on what's happening over there with the project. So I can be lucky that there was not so much influence on that. But on the other hand, I would say you can never control art in public space. You cannot control the weather. You cannot control what people think about it. This is also part of working in public space. Maybe one more example from Sculptuurproject Münster. There was this yellow Madonna by Katharina Fritsch. And on one hand, was always destroyed by people who were very religious because they thought it's blasphemy. On the other hand, people brought candles, brought flowers because they thought it's the Holy Mary, So it's both, you cannot control it. And I think this is something which I really like about it, because for me, this, what you cannot control, is also part of the freedom of having a very personal relationship towards art. But of course, you should take care as a curator that there is nothing happening where the artwork gets somehow kidnapped by a completely different agenda or something.
Okay, on that note, Lisa, I would like to ask you to wrap up the conversation.
I think it's impossible to wrap up the conversation, but that won't stop me from trying. For me, what Britta has so eruditely underlined is the temporal aspect of art outside the museum. We are here to think about land art lives and land art lives. I think what we should really take from Britta's thoughts is remembering that the world around land art changes, and that temporality is as much part of the artwork as its material form. And when the world changes, it changes conceptually and materially, coming back to this question of infrastructure. We are living in a time of climate emergency. We're also living in a time, a wonderful time, when opinions are changing, where we are being much more cognizant of the brutality of what it is to be human. And perhaps what Britta's projects and wise words is reminding us that art is fundamentally about being human, and to be human, we're also inhuman. And that is why land art continues, with all of its flaws, to matter. And this is what we're here to think about. Thank you, Britta.
Really beautiful. Thank you so much, Britta Peters and Lisa Le Feuvre. Really, really beautiful. I think it's so easy when you're a land art addict to get lost in the journey, and and then it's really good to have you two offering us an analysis of different perspectives that you could take. We're going to. I can hear your stomachs rumbling already. So we are desperately in need of lunch now. But the afternoon program will be like this. And then you'll have all a key card, which will bring you to the right workshop session that you can see on the next slide. There you are. So that's about it. Maybe that's the briefest version of what I could tell you now, which might be good. If you have any questions, go to the one with the black keycord, because they know everything. They can answer all your questions. And then don't forget that in the foyer downstairs, there's also this little table with a wonderful selection of books that are not all for sale, but they are meant to tempt you to buy them elsewhere. There is a book for there is a book for sale, which is the Land Art Life book, and you should take it. You should buy it, I think. And then we'll reverse rounds. We'll go to the workshops at 2. Yes, so don't be back here at 2, but find your space, the space of your workshop. Thank you very much.